Hello, everybody out in Parent-Tween Connection land. I am super excited for the conversation that you are about to listen to. And by the way, if you are tuning in live, you can catch us in our Facebook group at Parent-Tween Connection or on LinkedIn or on a YouTube live. But if you're tuning in from our Facebook group or from LinkedIn, you can actually ask questions as we go. And if you miss this and you catch the replay, you can comment in both places, and Kelly and Abigail will see those comments and we'll be able to continue the conversation. So why am I so excited about this? Well, number one, I adore Kelly and Abigail White. I think that should just be at the top of the list. But number two, I've said this to them both before. I wish I had had people like them 30 years ago. For any of you who know the backstory of Parent-Tween Connection, part of it was that my mom and I struggled, and I really wish that we could have had a stronger, closer, more compassionate relationship over the years. And I'm just thrilled, Kelly and Abigail, that you are offering this to other moms and daughters. And so without further ado, good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Get out of here. Get out of my head.
They answered in tandem. It's like they know each other or something. Just a little bit. So when I put the call out for podcast conversations for the month of February, we've been having conversations based on relationships and communication, among other topics. And I was like, oh, compassionate conversations, man, this is something that isn't just for mothers and daughters, perhaps primarily for mothers and daughters at times, but certainly not only for mothers and daughters. And so Kelly and Abigail, one of the first points that you always like to emphasize is that people give and receive information differently.
Oh, yes.
As a veteran test prep coach and tutor myself, I get this, but like so many people don't realize that this is a thing. Talk to me. What the heck do you mean?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple different layers to that, really. The first piece of it is that we actually all have different conversation personality styles. So kind of similar to how we all, like if you've ever heard of personality tests like DISC and that kind of thing, like we all function a little differently. And the same holds true when we're talking about conversation. We all like to, like you said, give and receive information differently, just on a natural, like biological level. And really there's 4 main different conversation personality styles so right there, if you're not aware of the fact that there are different approaches to conversation, that's putting up a barrier in the communication right from the get-go.
Sure.
You could be trying to express something that the other person just isn't receiving based on the difference there.
Yes. So let me give you an example. We have one personality style out of the 4 is very bullet point driven, right? Kind of like with DISC directors, they want you to give them information in okay, boom, boom, boom. I don't care about your family. I don't care. Like it's just how their brain operates.
It's not that they don't care.
Thank you. Yes.
It's not that they don't care about the family. It's just not top of mind when it comes to the conversation at hand.
Right. It's not their priority, as it were.
It's not their priority. They are get to the point people.
Right.
Yep.
And then
Understood.
You have other people that are, they're going to get to the point, but they want the niceties. They want that connection. They want to make sure you feel good before you share information. So right out of the gates, before the conversation even starts, it can be a barrier because you have the driver who is like, could you please just get to the point in their mind? And you have the other person on the other side of the spectrum that's instantly like, okay, yeah, great. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. So before the conversation is started, boom, there's a little bit of a wall already there.
Right. Well, and I certainly see that, when I open up my tutoring sessions, when I'm working with, SAT or ACT bound students, some of them, I can think of one right now who like just, I always start out, hey, how's it going? How was school this week? Fine. And they just want to like jump in and do the thing. Whereas another one takes the time to be like, oh, my dad and I went and did this, and I went and I visited these colleges, and I loved this one and I didn't like that one. Or whatever the case may be. And I'm certainly more of the latter person.
Mhm.
And it definitely makes me feel more disconnected when the students are just like, fine, and like, don't even want to talk about any. I mean, yes, I know that our purpose in being there is test prep, but sometimes there's an aspect of like, that's how I show that I care, is by asking about things surrounding test prep. At least that's how I operate. And
Right.
man, do I just have to adjust that because they don't want to do it sometimes.
Yeah. And honestly, for them, it's not always just, I don't want to do it. They're just not comfortable with it. It just makes them uncomfortable, and they're already in a situation where I need help with something. And now I'm out of my comfort zone with the conversation too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So can you take a minute and Kelly, you started to dive into those two as opposite conversation types or conversation personalities. But Abigail, you said there were 4, right? So Kelly, can you expand on those?
Yeah. So we have the driver and the influencer, which is the 2 that I was just talking about. There's also the evaluator, which is myself, where, we want all the bullet points and all the information, but then don't ask us to answer you very quickly, because we need to digest and process what's happening, right? And Abigail, the 4th name escapes me right now. Please help me.
A relator.
A relator, exactly, who is kind of the people pleaser in the room. They want every person in the room to be comfortable, feel part of the conversation, and they're very concerned with that.
Yes, they're the person, if you are working in a team, for instance, right? There's a team of 4 people. The driver is going to say, all right, what do we need to accomplish? Let's task out the bullet points and let's do it. Let's go. The evaluator is also going to say, yes, give me all of the information. What do we need to accomplish? But they're much slower to the conversation approach. Like Kelly was saying, they take a little more time to process and really think out every aspect of what they're going to say before they say it. And then you have the influencer, who is very big picture. When you're on a team, they are looking at not just all of the details of tasks that need to be done, but they're also very people oriented and looking at the big picture as far as nuances with the team itself.
They're very future forward too, right? They're looking at all these bullet points and, okay, well, how's this going to impact us in 2 years, instead of let's just get it done right now and we'll worry about 2 years in 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you have the relator, who is definitely the person who is like, okay, all right, yes, let's get this done, but we need to make sure we are communicating well. We need to make sure everybody feels heard and included. They're that person of the team that makes sure you work as a team.
Right. And so I can see this definitely coming up in family situations, right? With these different personalities. But then let's also add in the fact that with young adults, depending on where your kid is in terms of their chronological and biological age, right? They're still maturing. And one of the things that we don't think about is that the brain, as a part of our body, is also maturing. Like, we know that there are things they don't know academically yet, but oftentimes, especially I find when kids start hitting puberty and their bodies start changing and start looking more like adults, as the adults, we forget, or maybe we didn't even know, that their brains are the last part of their bodies to develop, right? Like the frontal lobe, the part that's right behind the forehead, which is responsible for executive function and critical thinking, and what you are talking about in many ways in this process, that isn't actually even fully developed until they're like 25 or 26. They're close to a decade potentially out of your home before that's fully online. And yet we look at these young adults at the ages of like 16 and 17 and 18, and we're like, you're about to go off to college and you're pretty much like, you're almost to legal adulthood. And we expect them to function mentally the same way that we do, which, so we can take these 4 different personalities, number one, and I would propose probably that we're not all exclusively one or the other. We may
definitely not.
And it may vary as to which role we play based on what role we play in a circumstance. We might be one way at work, or another way with our friends, a different way with our spouse, and possibly the 4th way with our kids.
Yeah. So there is a thing we have core communication styles, right? Like she said, that's kind of biological. We're born with, it's who we are. It's how we just naturally roll into how we like to communicate. And then we have our adaptive styles, which we all do, right? It's a little bit of the masking, but we need to adapt to our situations. Problems ensue when we take on our adaptive styles as our core styles because we're trying to be somebody else and always trying to communicate in a different fashion. And so therefore pushing our needs aside like they're unimportant.
Sure. And I hear kids all the time saying to me, my parents don't listen to me. They just don't let me get my thoughts out. Da, 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 da. And I see two potential reasons relevant to this conversation. Number one, parent and kid may just have different styles. But number two, to the point of like the kid styles aren't fully formed yet because they're still learning how to communicate. And I think back to my childhood, you look at me when I'm talking to you, or, hearing families where the kiddo doesn't respond as quickly as the mother or the father might like them to. And, what's wrong with you? Why can't you answer me? Give me an answer. And like, I hear those types of stories as well. And I can see
nothing's wrong. I'm just an evaluator and I'm taking my time.
Well, exactly. I even think like about my husband and me, not so much on a communication basis, but on a processing, making decision basis. I joke around that I'm the F-18 and he's the aircraft carrier. Both are critical to the military structure, right?
Yeah.
And one isn't better or worse. I'm definitely the more flighty, let's go to the next thing, let's make a decision and go in a lot of cases. And he's the one who needs to process and needs to think about things. And to my mind, there are times I'm just like, oh my gosh, could you make a decision, please?
Oh my gosh, Clarissa, I feel you so deep on that one with my partner being who she is, Miss Evaluator over there. And like you said, like both pieces absolutely critical. Part of why our partnership works so great is because I'm more like you and she's definitely more of a, all right, but let's take those things and kind of
take a step back and think about it.
Right.
Okay. So we've got some biological tendencies. We've got some, probably some nurture and some nature and nurture in this, the styles of communication and the way that we give and receive information. But there's also what y'all call conversational baggage.
Yes, ma'am.
And that would be the next layer to why conversations can be so difficult.
Right. So conversational baggage, and it's one of the reasons Abigail and I talk about healing and kind of feeling and regulating your emotions, right? Conversational baggage is all those things that you stuff back subconsciously that you don't like to think about that you bring to conversations. Beliefs.
Not even necessarily things that you stuff back, but just things that are ingrained in your subconscious as well.
Right.
Sure.
Like your beliefs.
Your biases, your generational upbringing, your societal influences, trauma, just so many things. Like there's all of this baggage that you bring to a conversation. Abigail and I have, after dissecting kind of blow-ups that we had, and being able to use these tools and realize, okay, like really looking at why was I so bothered? Like, why was I so bothered? Sometimes it is because what one of us said was inappropriate, right? We just didn't say something appropriately. We didn't understand each other and we need to apologize. A good, I would say, what would you say, 75% of the time?
It's really going to go to 85.
Yeah, I mean, we were triggered by something that was said that had nothing to do with the conversation, but something that was a bias or a belief or a trauma or experience that we had in the past, that created an emotion in us that we didn't want to feel, we didn't want to face, and so the conversation just took a turn.
That makes me think back to, my goodness, this is probably 15 to 17 years ago. Joe and I did a personal development class with a group out in Southern California when we lived out there. And one of the coaches talked about like all of our life's experiences. He kind of drew an analogy to like a wash rag that had been soaked in gasoline.
Okay.
Right. Like all like the traumas, like everything that you're describing, everything that you bring because of your past experiences good, bad, neutral, indifferent, whatever,
Mhm.
right? Probably the more traumatic ones, the more triggering ones, right? Are the ones that are the gasoline on the wash rag. But then the current conversation has placed the wash rag next to a lighter.
Mhm.
Yes.
And something in the conversation literally creates this spark, just like a lighter would. And the spark catches the wash rag that has been soaked in gasoline. And all of a sudden, it's this huge, monstrous conflagration. And and oftentimes the person who wasn't triggered is sitting there going, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. Right.
Like, how did we go from A to W? Like, we've only got X, Y, and Z left before this relationship is just toast, or whatever the case may be, right? And they're
Right.
like, what? I wasn't deliberately trying to be a jerk, but something just got triggered. Like, if you have the awareness to know that that's what's happening. But that sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And most people
Absolutely.
don't have the awareness, right? I shouldn't say
Mhm.
most
Just where
people.
reacting comes in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what we say, responding. We like to respond rather than react. We talk with clients. I use snakes as an example. Like, what happens when a snake feels cornered?
It
Right?
strikes.
The snake is going to strike because it wants it to stop. And when someone feels cornered in a conversation, they start throwing out all sorts of things, even if they're not relevant, if they don't mean them. They're in survival mode and they need the conversation to stop for whatever reason. It might not have anything to do with the conversation. It's this
Or you, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I hear that's often, if it's the kid who feels cornered, right? Or the younger, I use kid broadly speaking, right? The younger one, the subordinate, if you will, in whatever perceived situation, right?
Right.
That they feel triggered. They respond in such a fashion so as to stop the conversation. In the family dynamic, or the mother-daughter, parent-kid dynamic, I can hear you're not going to talk to me like that. You're not going to be disrespectful to me. And then the parent takes offense to it.
Mhm.
Yes, they take it personally.
And they totally take it personally. And, oh, hey, there's some more emotional baggage while we're at it. Let's just load that suitcase right on up.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Okay. So what else? I mean, obviously we can see all of the detrimental, or many detrimental effects that we've talked about so far. Are there any other detrimental effects that we haven't talked about that you have seen that you want to make parents aware of in this situation? Like, to really emphasize why we as the adults need to work to develop this awareness that, like you were saying, Kelly, like, not everybody has. I would propose many people don't.
Right.
What are some other detrimental things? Actually, Abigail, I'm going to go to you first as the kiddo, because I think as the adults, we sometimes lose sight of where the kids are.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're not a kid, but you're the kid in this dynamic.
Right. And well, to be honest, back to what you were saying earlier, Clarissa, about our brains not being fully formed and functioning in the way that an adult brain functions till it's about 26, right?
Mm-hmm.
26, 27. I mean, I'm not far past that. I feel like I'm 3 years into adulthood, if I'm being honest. So, right. But that is exactly why it is so important for the adults, because we have the ability to use that higher functioning, that higher thinking, to be aware of the subconscious triggers of our biases and beliefs, to analyze that and look at it. And the children, our children don't have that function yet, right? They're not capable. And it reminds me of what you were just saying, all those, well, what were you thinking? And why would you say that to me? And they weren't thinking, right? They weren't. And because, and not for a lack of anything's like, oh, they weren't thinking what's wrong with them, but they weren't thinking because their children and their brains aren't there yet.
Right.
And the same, how is that received on your end, though, when they're saying that, right? Like, well, how is that detrimental? How did you take those words?
But exactly. So what happens, though, then, at least from my experience when I was a child, right, I would just try to communicate my emotions, the way I was feeling. And it wasn't getting across for one reason or another. And when I got asked, like, well, how could you feel that way? How could you possibly think that? Why would you do that? It just made me feel worse. It just made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Not that necessarily I just have a different way of communicating, right? Or that I'm just not, I just haven't learned yet. Those are right. Or I have a need. We also like to say that behind every behavior is a need that isn't being met.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm not, as a child, I'm not able to look at that. But as the adult,
right.
You have an opportunity.
Well, and so I think it's important to clarify, like Kelly, I'm sure when you at the time, if and when you said those things, that Abigail's, is recognizing, wow, that really felt rotten. Like that wasn't your intention. You were trying to communicate and you were trying to figure out what was going on. And so I think it's important to recognize that in any conversation, in any dynamic, it's not like one person is necessarily trying to be mean or unkind. It's just that we don't necessarily, like, nobody teaches us how to communicate, which is why I love conversations like this.
Yeah. I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's just say, I think one thing that we tend to forget in the heat of the moment, both parents and kids, is at the core, we love each other and we want the best for each other. And we want each other to be happy. But when we're in this moment, we forget that. We think the other we perceive it in so many ways, right? They're trying to hurt me. They're trying to that, or how could they, or I'm so taken aback, or they're disrespecting me. Well, the truth of the matter is at the core, we love each other, and that's not what we want. We just don't know how to communicate.
Right. So beyond the awareness, Kelly, I'm going to direct this to you because you were the mom in the situation, right? And one with the fully formed frontal lobe as you were navigating these things. You were talking about unpacking the baggage. So, we've talked about the awareness that we have to be aware that there's baggage there in the first place. And then what are some of the things that we can do that are analogous to unzipping the zipper and taking their dirty laundry out and taking it to the washing machine? What does that look like in this environment?
I mean, it looks like, feeling it. Like I often say, you need to feel it to heal it. You need, once you're aware that there's baggage there, you need to look at why it's triggering you. And you need to use some tools so that you can take it away and not explode or use words that aren't, that you didn't intend. And so if you're aware that have some trauma or some beliefs or differing beliefs from your young one, and it's really affecting your conversations, it's a time to stop that conversation, right? The cornered snake. Let's stop this conversation right now and revisit it. It's not a get out of jail free card. We're going to come back to it, but let me look at why I'm responding in the way that I'm responding. So that right now we can be calm, and then I can come back and, instead of reacting, respond in a fashion where I can explain to you why I reacted that way, take accountability for it if it was an inappropriate reaction, and also try to make aware maybe you could have also used different words that, right? It's just keeping that dialogue open, but it starts with you. It starts with the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you think about yourself. Right. And your ability to look at the things in your life that trigger you.
Well, and I'm guessing that's a whole lot of what the two of you do as you work with mother-daughter teams, right?
Absolutely. Sure is.
And again, it's one of those, I wish that there had been somebody like you guys, even 15 years ago. I mean, my mom's passed at this point, so that those aspects of that, that relationship are what they are at this point. But goodness, having somebody that I could have talked to, like you, Abigail, as the daughter, and for my mom to have somebody to talk to, like you, Kelly, and for both of us to learn in our own ways, to be able to dissect those conversations with people like you who've been there, done the work, and could have guided us in unpacking our stuff. Goodness, that would have been life-changing. I mean, absolutely life-changing, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to wrap up this portion of our conversation. As we do that, Abigail, how do people find you?
All right. So you can find us a few different places. One is, of course, our website, themotherdaughterjourney.com. We also have a podcast called The Mother-Daughter Journey, which can be found on all of your streaming devices or streaming apps.
Platforms.
Spotify platforms. Thank you. That's the word. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all of the things, Pandora. We also are on Facebook and Instagram. as the Mother-Daughter Journey or
Perfect.
the.md journey on Instagram.
Yep.
And TikTok as well, which we are really trying to dive into. TikTok.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
Awesome. All right, Kelly, final words as before we go to our second part of our conversation, which is expressly for members of the Parent Tween Village. We're going to be talking about the parent's impact on sibling relationships. So if you are not part of Parent Tween Village, definitely pop over to our website at parenttweenconnection.com and click on the For Families link to join. It is a whopping $7 a month for the first year right now. But as we head out of here, Kelly, final thoughts to the moms who realize that things aren't quite what they wish they could be.
I would say take a breath, give yourself some grace, and don't judge conversations. Like, have some faith that you love your child, that you make decisions based on what's best for them. And now you have something else to look at. And so you did the best you could. Now you may be able to know better. Just take the time to learn without judgment, because you love your kids, right? And give yourself some grace and just learn.
Awesome. All right. With that, we are going to wrap up. Again, if you are tuning in to the replays, feel free to drop comments and we will get those questions that you've got. We'll get those over to Kelly and Abigail for their perspectives on things. And we will see you, Kelly and Abigail, in Parent Tween Village in just a minute. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having us.